Okay. Okay. Welcome, friends. Welcome, everyone, to NMBF Coffee Chats. This is essentially a church based Christian discussion forum, but there are topics and issues that we discuss not just for our community, but also for the society. And today we have one such topic on redevelopment. And, many cities, because of lack of space, there's some sort of an urban jungle, sky buildings everywhere. And so now redevelopment is really becoming very popular. And but there doesn't seem to be enough guidance on this subject. And so we want to thank God for providing advocate Floyd Gracias. I also want to acknowledge Rosie Norona, who was instrumental in bringing this connection. And we also want to listen to you. And please connect with us after the meeting. And if there are subjects and issues that you think are important, we are willing to discuss it over here. So just a warm welcome to Advocate Floyd Gracias. Gracias, thank you so much for joining with us today. And I will
Thank you
just
so much.
quickly introduce our speaker to you. Uh, Advocate Floyd Gracias has an extensive practice spanning over nearly 2 decades as advocate counsel at the High Court of Judicature at Bombay and over a decade as counsel at the Supreme Court of India. An illustrious alumnus of the prestigious St. Xavier's College, Mumbai, and subsequently the G.J. Advani Law College, Mumbai. He was enrolled as a member of the bar in the year 2007. Ever since within then with an extensive practice over 17 years, he has built a distinguished reputation and expertise in the fields of constitutional law, media law, property law, contract law, testamentary law, consumer protection, and environmental law. In the said duration, he has also acted as amicus curiae to the Honorable Bombay High Court in a suo motu PIL and as counsel to several large corporates and celebrities in a wide array of consultancy and litigation matters, both domestic and international. In addition to his role as counsel and advocate, Mr. Gracias also serves as the chief academic consultant and advisory board member at Lex Ducos, a premium legal edtech platform. So, with that, I want to welcome Advocate Floyd. Thank you so much, sir, for joining this morning. And
It's
over to
a
you
pleasure.
to lead us in this subject of redevelopment.
I'm just trying
Yeah.
to link the PPT to.
Okay. You may have to open it first and then click share screen on your Zoom.
That's what I'm
You need to
doing, but it's.
first you have to open the PPT but normally and then go to Zoom and click share screen. You'll be able to see it in one of the windows.
Has it started?
No, there's no, we can't see it. Is it possible for you to WhatsApp or email it to me? Then I could share it also from this side. Suppose if it
I think
doesn't,
it's on. It should be fine.
oh, it's on. Yeah, okay.
Is it on to y'all as well?
No, we can't see it still. Yeah, now.
Or I think the wrong screen is sharing.
Oh, yeah.
1 second.
You have to choose which screen you want to share and then say share.
Yeah.
Now, a number of windows that are open on your computer are showing. You have to choose which one you want to show and then say share.
Is it fine now?
Yeah,
I think
it is. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction and, of course, for inviting me to speak on this platform. If there's anyone who wants to, probably throw in some inputs on, any expectations during this thing, you can shoot it out. Or Pastor, if you would like to, any major
Yeah, I think
expectations.
it will be better if you finish your talk and then we can go into Q&A and
Q&A we'll do later.
interaction.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, yeah.
So basically, when you talk about redevelopment, first of all, what we'll be looking at is, for one, we have to, there are several legal issues that come into question. So it's not merely the redevelopment or, getting into a DA or getting into your respective agreements for self-development, but there is a whole underlying process. There is an entire, set of, documents that need to be created. There's what you call due diligence, which needs to be done. These are the processes that you need to follow, or these are the procedures that you need to follow prior to actually starting off with redevelopment. There are also several legalities which come into question, which are essential in terms of getting things done. Because, for instance, I'll tell you a case, and I'll do that later when we come into that issue. This is a case which we are handling, where societies themselves, forget the individual members, they do not seek legal opinion, or for instance, they don't have their due diligence in order. Like, for instance, in a case where there are multiple siblings, brothers and sisters, the flat was owned by the mother. The mother made a nomination in favor of only the sons and not the daughters, there being multiple sons and daughters. What happened as a result is the society, in its wisdom, without probably consulting professionals, have transferred the shares. And mind you, that's why if you see, there's the first pointer is society membership versus flat ownership. They've transferred the shares of the society to the sons being nominees, which is fine. The problem that came in is when they went in for redevelopment and the DA and the PAAA was signed. Because at that time, what happened was they took only the son signatures on the document. Now, when you're talking about this, what happens is, effectively, what you'll end up doing is, when you're giving your place in for redevelopment, the common areas that you're giving in, that is largely your society property, which means it's governed by your membership. But when you're handing over your flat, that is property. That is not virtue of your membership. That is ownership property. Now that goes to the heirs of the deceased. So assuming the mother died without a will, effectively what happens is the entire property goes to all the legal heirs. That means the sons as well as the daughters. Now what has happened is they have not put the daughters on record, which is why now the daughters have to go to court and get the court to pass a declaratory order declaring them as co-owners of the flat. That would also mean resigning and setting aside the PAAA, because that would have to now have a new PAAA coming in to include the daughters' names, or a deed of rectification to add them in, whichever the case may be. These are the kind of problems. So, understanding things like that, then, your questions of title, which is a very crucial thing, like, the conveyance of the land, which needs to be in the society's name. So there are several other issues that come in, and these underlying factors are more important than just the redevelopment process, because the redevelopment process is quite simple. It's very straightforward. The section 79A, you've got, guidelines, you've got everything in order. So what happens is you just, set it rolling, and in redevelopment especially, your builder takes care of most of it. In self-development, of course, there's a little more, because in self-development, there are a whole lot of other things that you need to look into. Also
Go with
the
the authority sent somebody from Manish Nagar.
sorry.
Yeah, go on, please. Please speak after the lawyer is finished, advocate has finished his session. Thank you.
Yeah, it would be better if you could keep the question and answers for the end, as Pastor rightly suggested, because what happens is most of it may be covered in the subsequent part of the presentation. So, that will make it easier, because we'll, spend less time overlapping things. Okay, so let's get into, first of all, why, as Pastor Abhijit was saying, large parts of the city and country are going through redevelopment at this juncture. Now, why do you have, these issues, and why is so much of redevelopment happening? One is the aging of buildings, which comes in most of the older buildings. If you notice, most of the societies going in for redevelopment, their structures would be above 40, 50, 60 years. Now what happens is, with the structures being that old, the cost of repairs, and there's this whole thing of the C1 category structures for the MCGM jurisdiction in Mumbai. C1 basically means the buildings are unfit for habitation. Okay, which means they are not in a position to be repaired. The exact classification says to be evacuated, vacated, building to be brought down and reconstructed from scratch. So effectively, what happens in such cases is these buildings, beyond repair, would have to be brought down. Now there is the other option of feasibility, and then of course the growing need for housing. Now there is, when I say feasibility, it's not only the architectural feasibility of how much can we exploit the FSI, and how much extra area can we get and things like that. That is the architectural feasibility. But when I'm saying feasibility in terms of dilapidated conditions, what generally happens is, many a time the buildings are not C1 or C2B categories, but the buildings are so old that the cost of repairs and the periodical repairs that you need to do, which is sometimes as often as once every 5 years, doesn't make it feasible for buildings or societies to keep doing it again and again. So, the buildings would generally then pass a resolution saying, it just makes more sense to go in for redevelopment. Let's, demolish the entire building and build it up from scratch again, brand new building. At least, for the next few years, you're kind of secure, the building's not going to give way. Of course, that then comes into the whole question of your negotiations and how you pull it forward. But broadly speaking, yes, that's the larger reason why, especially for residents, Mumbai residents, a lot of the old buildings and most of the coastal areas, because of the weather conditions and other things, the aging of the buildings result in conditions where it's at some point more feasible to redevelop the building rather than keep repairing the same old structure. And the growing need for housing, of course, with the urban structure and the population growth, especially in the larger cities, there is a need to create more housing. So larger buildings replace the smaller ones, and of course you have more housing for the general public. This is where we started, and this is what I think we need to focus on, which is, what is your membership versus what is your ownership. For one reason, when you're talking about your rights, there are two parallel laws that run when you come to redevelopment. So one is, what you're talking of is in terms of the ownership. When I say ownership, there is the ownership of the land, which goes into the cooperative societies, and there is ownership of your flat. Each of you as a flat owner or as a property owner is entitled to your flat. So when you're handing over to redevelopment or to self-development, what you're effectively doing is you're handing over two aspects: your flat, which is your ownership property, which is what we talk about in the second half of the slide, the flat owner part, and then the common land, the common areas, the common infrastructure that the society is building along with the land on which the society stands. That is your effective that is your effective membership rights, because you're basically a shareholder. You have shares in the society. So effectively, as a member, you are a shareholder in that common estate, in that common property. As far as the flat is concerned, you are the absolute owner of that flat. Okay, so the first thing is the governing laws. As far as the governing laws are concerned, the society for Maharashtra is Maharashtra Society Cooperative Societies Act. For flats, it is the Transfer of Property Act. That's the law under which all properties are transferred and governed. And then there are a whole lot of other acts like the Stamps Act, the Registration Act for registration of documents, Ownership of Flats Act, and now for new properties, RERA when you're doing a transfer as well, especially when it's from a builder. What goes into your rights as a member is basically all the benefits that you get from the society. So your common parkings, if there's a clubhouse, if there are swimming pools, and I'll go to this in terms of the facilities when we talk about this, as far as negotiating with your developers are concerned, because it's always a case where everyone promises a lot. The question of delivery then becomes another issue. So I mean, if you see a lot of the projects which come up, especially in smaller cities and out of town, they promise you clubhouses. The clubhouse is probably a little bigger than the size of your flat. um, the swimming pool is probably the size of two bathtubs put together. But because what happens is, for marketing, it becomes convenient to say I have all these facilities. Question is, are those facilities really feasible or not? And then it puts your maintenance cost up at the end of the day. So these negotiables you need to actually look into, when is it really worth it, is it not? These are negotiables that the society needs to consider with the PMCs, and of course the developer at the time of deciding what goes in, what doesn't. So parking rights, common areas, these are all what you get under society law. Your flat rights, in terms of the right to sell the flat, lease it, put on a leave-in license, all of that goes into your ownership rights under the transfer of property law. The laws, of course, the courts, the jurisdictions, deputy register, then of course the appellate authorities under the Cooperative Societies Act. For ownership, it's always the civil courts. Let's move now to development. These prerequisites are basically general development prerequisites. It's applicable to both redevelopment as well as self-development. So the first thing is, there is what we have in Latin, a maxim called nemo dat quod non habet, which means no man can transfer what he does not have, or no man can give what he does not own. Simply, explaining that, what would happen is, when you say you cannot transfer, meaning when you are transferring developmental rights with respect to the plot, you need to first own that plot in order to pass on those rights to the developer. Now, whether it's to a developer in redevelopment, or whether you are going to be that developer and exercise rights in respect of that plot, either way, you need to own that plot. If you ain't the owner of that plot, then the question of the further assignment of rights, whether to a PMC and a construction company in self-development, or whether to an external developer in redevelopment, either way, if you don't own the plot, or you don't have the conveyance in your favor, it becomes almost impossible. It becomes a very cumbersome process to actually execute any further aspect of development, which is why a lot of the developments where conveyance is not done, they have to either get the conveyance from the owners, or the other option is you land up doing a deemed conveyance and getting the property transferred to the society's name. Now, generally, also when it's an owner property, then if the property is still in the erstwhile owners, you will have to get the owners involved. So that becomes another issue. Then it becomes a tripartite agreement, and the entire dynamics actually change, which of course creates its own fair share of problems. So therefore, it's always essential that you get the conveyance in favor of the society, of course duly stamped and registered, which is most important. Unregistered documents will not be admissible. Property registration, Kachi, these are all minor things, okay? But these things help you, these minor diligences help you to make sure that you are safe. The projects don't get stalled, because quite often there is a property card entry, or there is a conveyance not done. You somehow manage to surpass that, get into redevelopment, and then the owners come and say, 1 minute, this property is in my name. So how is it that you as a society are redeveloping it? Because we are the owners, you need our consent. Now, there is, of course, in terms of this, there is a different aspect to leasehold properties, because for the kind of societies that we have in Mumbai and in several parts of the country, where you have leasehold, where they either collector's lease, or so collector's lease is a different procedure. Approval is required. If it's leased from particular bodies, trusts, societies, in that case, the trust or the society that owns the land has to be a party to your redevelopment, whether an active party or a formal party, depending on your lease agreement. But in whichever capacity, the owner of the land always has to be a party to it. All these need to be reflected into your property card. Your society registration needs to be in order. Your due diligence, your compliances need to be up to date.
See that big water bottle don't give, because Anita may want that big one.
Okay, I think that's not for me. The property should be free from encumbrance. That is another very important thing. When I say free from encumbrance, meaning that there should be no litigation on the property. Of course, there are builders who will take up your property in litigation. Then, of course, your negotiations and the details of which would substantially differ. But in effect, yes, if your property is free from encumbrance, there is no litigation. It generally makes your deal and your transaction far smoother and much easier to operate. Either an MOU or consent from the majority of all the members of the society after a general body has been convened. So once you have your documents in order and the society is kind of decided that okay, yes, we need to go in with development. I'm saying development in the sense in both aspects, either redevelopment or self-development, as the case may be. Once you are sure that okay, this is what we need to do, the first thing you'll need to do is put it to vote, special general body meeting. As far as the majority is concerned, pursuant to the latest rulings, 51 or simple majority is sufficient to run your development. However, I mean, I have advised societies in the past, at least the ones that come to us, try and get as close to 100 as possible. It's always very easy to say I have a 51 and I'm good to go. Of course, it is true. It's absolutely true. The point being, the closer to 100 that you get, so if you can get a 75, 80, and 90, the more people you get on board, the easier it is, the less obstacles you're going to face, and you're going to have greater unity as far as getting the end result is concerned. Now, very simply, what is redevelopment? What is self-development? I think most of you already know this. Redevelopment is the easier way out. You just give the entire, so you sign a development agreement, you hand over the entire development to a developer who's a professional in that business. He will take care of everything. All you do is sign the DA, get your paperwork in order, move out of the property. After that, your developer takes care of everything. He will demolish it, reconstruct a new building, and of course, when you have a ready flat, you move back in. So that's how it works. Whereas with self-development, understand this, and this is something that you need to be very clear about when you decide self-development. I know self-development is trending, especially in Mumbai, but what you need to be very clear about is when you get into self-development, understand one thing: you are the captain of the ship. You are deciding what goes up, what goes how it's done, the features, the facilities, everything, even from getting your permissions, except for whatever of course the PMC covers. But the entire thing is controlled by the society and its special committee for self-development. Now in all of these cases, what happens is you will need to do the work. The effort needs to be put in by the society. um, the entire thing is going to be managed by you. Now what you need to understand is, of course, the upside of this is what you see towards the end of that slide. You are in control, because when you are doing self-development, at the end of the day, you're the captain of the ship. So you call the shots, you're in control. Whereas in redevelopment, of course, you've given it to the builder, he is the boss. Okay, so that's what you majorly need to decide. Again, from the kind of stuff that we've handled, it purely depends on society to society. So when you're taking this call, I mean, you need to see the kind of available members that you have, the kind of cooperation that you get from the members. If members are willing to all pitch in, if members are all willing to help out and go in for self-development, of course you can consider it. But if everyone's caught up with their own lives and their own work, and you find it really difficult to get people to come on board and assist, in that case you may want to consider redevelopment, because at least there you all don't have to monitor everything. The builder takes care of everything. So these are things that you need to weigh in terms of the pros and cons, to ensure that you're not stuck, or you don't hit roadblocks at some point in the future. So that's literally your deciding factor. Do you want it done, or do you want to do it? If do it yourself is what you like, then self-development is your option. If you want to sit back and get it done, then of course redevelopment is your option. So that should probably help you decide. That should be a crucial factor in deciding, which way you want to work around. Society's responsibilities in development, of course, what we discussed earlier, obtaining majority consent. Majority consent would, of course, mean as much as possible. Okay, when I say as much, like I said, 51 is the bare minimum, 100 is the ideal. The closer you get to the ideal, the happier you'd be, in terms of the entire process. Select a reliable builder, developer after due diligence and research. That's always a tough call. People ask me, how do you find a good builder? The last seminar I did, some really intellectual people were, I don't know whether they were, kind of joking or were trying to pull one at me, or they were really seriously asking me that. But they said, how do I trust a builder? And my logic to them was, how do you trust a lawyer if he tells you how to trust a builder? Okay, because, because the kind of trust people have in this thing, I mean, it's very tough for us to say how to do it. And I mean, nothing is foolproof at the end of the day. But the joke apart, it's always essential that you do your due diligence. Your PMC and your legal team will be in a position to help you ascertain that there are enough, research options available. There's, legal due diligence that can be done, that can at least give you an idea in terms of, if it's a, construction company, you can actually assess the company from a company law standpoint in terms of how, secured and safe the company is. If there are any proceedings against the company, litigation searches can be carried out so that you know how much of default, if any, is there. If there is bankruptcy charges against any of the directors in that company, there are several things that you need to look at. So it's always advisable for your due diligence. I mean, maybe the initial thing is, okay, you do a bit of casual research, ask around, hey, by the way, have you heard of this builder, this guy, or whatever. But at some point, when you're getting more serious about closing deals, it's always better to use professional services and actually assess the developers from a standpoint. So once you probably shortlist your top 3 or whatever, it makes a lot more sense to actually assess it from a professional viewpoint. The prerequisites for development that we discussed earlier, that is what you need to get ready before you decide to hit redevelopment or self-development. Make sure you have all the papers, all the documents in place to hand over to the developer, so that it's easier for the developer as well as for you all. Seek professional assistance and expertise, because at the end of the day, each one knows their own job. So it's always better if you have professionals looking into it, because especially when you're doing your diligence, both the paperwork as well as your due diligence on the developer, it's always preferable that you use professional advice, because the kind of way it's searched, the way it's always advisable that PMCs, legal and accountancy professionals look at all of this. Factors to be negotiated, this is very crucial. And I mean, when you look at this, and why I'm going to lay a bit of emphasis on this is primarily because these are things that there are 2 parts to it. So one is your negotiation phase, which needs to be very clear. The more clear you are at the negotiation phase, that clarity is going to reflect into your deeds and documents, which is your DA and all subsequent documents that come up thereafter. Once that is clear, your chance for dispute is drastically reduced. I am not saying disputes can't happen. Disputes can happen anyway, okay? But at least if you're clear, the chance of a dispute is drastically reduced, which is why it's always better to be clear in terms of concept and clear in terms of expectations, so you know what you're expecting and you're pretty much getting into things with eyes wide open. Rights, duties, liabilities need to be very clearly set out. Your documents need to contain the rights, duties, and liabilities of the society, what the society, or the obligations of the society, the obligations, deliverables of the developer, and if there is any individual responsibility from each member, then of course, yes, even that. Alternate accommodation while work is in progress, very important to be specified. Now, when you're dealing with accommodation, there are certain key aspects that you'd want to consider, one of which is the rent escalation. because generally in most leave and license cases there is a 5% escalation here on here. The second thing is, most of the time when a standard DA is drawn up, you generally would have an agreed period. So for instance, the developer commits to completing the project in 24 months with a grace period or an extension period of another 6 months. So you're looking at a total of 30 months, which is approximately 2.5 years. Now your rent has been factored in for 2 years, 24 months. You probably have a buffer clause saying that if it extends by 6 months, we will also pay the rent for the additional 6 months. The question is, most development agreements overlook the fact that what if the project, for any reasons, whether it's reasons of the developer or reasons beyond the control of the developer, the project doesn't get completed within the stipulated period. RERA provisions, yes, you have all the provisions for that, but apart from that, what do you do? So your rent agreement needs to factor that in the event that the development is not completed or the possession is not handed over within the time frames and such extension is granted, the rent for that extended period is also covered under the provisions for rent. Otherwise, what happens is, once the agreed period expires, the developer is not under obligation to pay you the additional rent. Because if the rent commitment was only 24 months with an extension up to 30, 31st month rent is not the liability of the developer. Most developers may consider it, but if he doesn't, or if the developers choose not to, it becomes very difficult. Then you'll have to go to court and stuff like that. So it's always easier to have this set out. Corpus fund is the next thing. Corpus fund, in terms of the kind of lump sum payments payable to the society and each member, if at all, extremely crucial, because generally when the depreciation is taken off on the older properties and the new property assessment comes in, also the additional cost of maintenance, considering the new facilities and features thrown into the new project, your general costs of maintenance and living in that society would increase. So the corpus fund helps at least the original members to buffer that cost in. So again, that's a subject matter of negotiation, depending on the kind of negotiation you've done and what is being offered. Additional area, if any, to be given to members. What's the percentage of area and how much extra you're getting. For this, I would suggest it's always better to take a feasibility report from an architect, because they would actually tell you the extent to which the property can be exploited. So then you can be reasonable and come up to a fair understanding or a fair expectation as far as the developer is concerned. You also know the developer is not giving you something substantially low, but while you're asking him for something higher, you're not asking him for something which is absolutely unreasonable. So it's fair to both the sides. I mean, that's the ideal way you're supposed to work if you want a successful development. Monetary compensation, other than of course the corpus fund, that means your shifting allowances, relocation, all of that. Is it one way? Is it two way? Payment of costs, as in your taxes, etc. Generally, the principle is up to the time of possession being handed over to the developer. That's paid by that's generally paid by the society. From the time vacant possession is handed over to the developer to the time possession is re-handed over to the society, all costs borne by the developer. And then once the society takes over, the society continues to pay again. Specification of area in the alternative flat. There are, this is it's a very gray area and a very subjective area, but most of the buildings going in for redevelopment would obviously be pre-2016 buildings. Now, when you look at pre-2016, and why I'm saying pre-2016 buildings is 2016 is when the Real Estate Regulation Act, or what you call RERA, came into force. As per RERA, now what all transactions are governed is what you call RERA carpet area. The older buildings have what is called MOFA carpet area. Now, there is a difference in MOFA carpet and RERA carpet. So what happens is, generally, when you're giving your place out, if you go by the agreement, you're giving your land out in terms of MOFA carpet. But what you're getting back is RERA carpet, which would be a little less than your MOFA carpet. So you're actually losing a good few square feet in the process, which is why either at the time you get a proper assessment done of the property and then convert it, or have an architect or have your PMC ensure that the equivalents are matched. That way you're not losing out too much on area. Fixtures and fittings, this is what we call in contract law agreeing upon the same thing in the same sense. Okay. And now, if I am the developer and I say, yes, I'm giving you bathroom fittings, I'm giving you taps and all the fittings in the bathroom, but you are under the impression that you are getting Jacqua, and I am under the impression that I'm just going to give you some local brand. We are agreeing upon the same thing in terms of fixtures and fittings, but we're not agreeing upon it in the same sense. So, there are generally what we do is in terms of your development agreement or your PAAs, the schedule of fixtures are added to the agreement. So your fixtures, fittings, amenities, all of this is added to your list of amenities. So that is officially in your registered document. It also needs to be specific. Like if there are specific brands of vitrified tiles or specific, fixtures, if there is some of the flats come in with basic furnishing, like, your modular kitchens or whatever, all of that needs to be spelled out. Common areas, parking facilities. I mean, common areas is another thing that you need to be very clear about. Like I mentioned earlier, what are the facilities being offered? Is there a clubhouse? Is there a swimming pool? What are the plans in respect of that? And then ensure delivery happens according to that. Parking space and open space is another very important thing, because the assignment of parking spaces, is it being builder assigned? Is it being society assigned? Legally, it should be ideally society assigned. But of course, in several cases, you have, the developer having assigned certain rights. So all of these things would, at some point you would require to have these things clearly clarified, so that you don't have any issues as far as things are concerned. Payment of dues, we've already spoken about. So now, additional factors in terms of documentation. The older school of thought would ask for bank guarantee and, of course, indemnities from the builder. Today, you have the RERA guarantee. So, of course, it's a lot easier. The law lays down the entire process. So, RERA helps you. You need to have a RERA guarantee. Project needs to be RERA registered. Indemnification clauses from the builder, as whatever has been negotiated and discussed, need to be reflected in your documents. So when you're talking of, for instance, your DA, your PAAA, all of that needs to reflect these indemnity clauses. Vacating the premises, that's your existing structure, and handing over the completed premises. So you have to have very set timelines. In terms of, generally, we advise clients not to move off till the IOD comes in. There have been cases, in fact, we just recently got an order from the Bombay High Court on one of this, where the building was demolished even prior to plans being put in, and the building stayed demolished. Stayed vacated from 2011 to 2021. 21 was when it was demolished by the corporation for being a dangerous structure. And till date, nothing has been done. So, it's always better to hand over possession when the IOD is in or nearing, so that at least, you're certain there's some furtherance of the DA. Handing over the completed possession of the premises, there are enough rulings from both the High Court and the Supreme Court that until the occupation certificate comes in, you cannot physically take possession. So even if possession is granted prior to the grant of the occupation certificate, your possession is only notional, meaning you can hold the keys, but you can't actually reside in that flat. Okay, you can't full-time occupy that flat until the occupation certificate comes. The occupation certificate is basically the certificate that certifies the building fit for occupation. Jurisdiction and arbitration. So a lot of the newer agreements have a clause for arbitration for certain aspects. In self-development, your agreements would also have arbitration provisions for agreements with, your PMCs, which I'll do later. Jurisdiction of the courts need to be expressly set out. Of course, RERA has set most of it. Remedies for breach of contracts agreements, very, very important. So, If it's set out earlier, it gives you less chance for debate. RERA compliances. The compliances required under the Real Estate Regulation Act need to be fully complied with. 79A, obtain majority consent, as discussed earlier. Obtain a project management consultant. See, many people have this notion that if we're going in for development as opposed to, redevelopment as opposed to self-development, there is no point appointing a PMC. Why? Builder will have his own guys. There's no point having a legal team. There's no point, having lawyers and chartered accountants on board. It's always advisable to have your own team. It's always advisable to have a team that looks after your best interests. Okay. So PMC is going to probably give you a feasibility report in terms of checking your DAs, checking your agreements. You need a legal consultant. It's always good to have somebody on board. If necessary, appoint an architect as well to ensure that the plans, everything are in order. Whatever is coming in from the developer is perfectly legal and justified. Construction contractor. Again, 79A is more advisory. It's not mandatory. So certain aspects can be worked around. But it's always advisable to comply with 79A because that would give you, it's basically a checklist that helps you ensure that your entire redevelopment process is in order. Now, if you're going into self-development, it's a lot more hard work because it's not just one DA that you're going to be signing. You'll be effectively signing contracts with various entities and parties. First of all, the PMC, because the PMC is going to coordinate most of your activity, most of your operations. So first, you'll have to have a contract with the PMC. Then you have a contract with the architect. Then you have a contract with the construction contractor. The construction contractor is the guys who are going to actually execute your construction. Contract with any other party. There are several other vendors, parties that would come in during the course of development. So, of course, that will be society and each of these parties. Then documents for the loan, if you're taking funding, and the mortgage process, and sale agreements for the flats. These are, of course, the saleable component flats. What to check for at the time of possession? Very importantly, the occupation certificate. If you take possession without an occupation certificate, you are liable to be evicted. Approved plans and the final plans, that go into the records, because you'll have to ensure that the physical structure matches those plans. That's again where your architects come in, which is why I said it's always good to have an architect on board. Compliance with the development agreement, like I mentioned earlier, your duties, your obligations, your rights, several parties, so the society, the members, the developer, everybody, you have to ensure that all those rights have been duly satisfied. Any other commitments that have been agreed upon, ensure that those are fulfilled. Area is very important. Make sure that what you're actually getting is according to what was agreed upon either in the PAAA or in the development agreement. And I mean, before we close it, of course, this is what I've been kind of shouting out loud throughout the entire presentation. Check your documents thoroughly and do not go based on whatever general advice I give you on these public talks. It's always much better to have somebody actually vet those documents, somebody actually go through them, literally sit with a fine-tooth comb and go through every detail of it. Because general advice is great. There are a lot of videos and informative bits on the net, but at some point in time, when you have to actually do it, it's a lot safer that you have professionals coming on board. Largely, I think we've looked at these aspects. I think we can now start off with the Q&A session.
Sure. Yeah, thank you so much, Advocate Floyd, for such a crisp, clear, and systematic presentation. I'm sure a lot of questions have been answered, but then